Okay, so I have gotten a number of times a question of, well, what language should I learn? I want to get into programming. I don't know where to begin, and I kind of broke things down in my head. A few, a couple of different, I guess, in three different categories. Uh, First is what I would consider the top two for new developers, and that would be Python and Node.js. Now, Python is used for all over the place. You have MicroPython and CircuitPython running on our little circuit boards, and you have Python used in data science where you're analyzing reams of data, or I guess it would call it gigabytes of data or terabytes of data. Um, the other thing is it covers the major object oriented concepts. So you're going to get your classes and inheritance and that sort of thing. The syntax is not abstract. However, it's not quite as commonly used for smart contracts. It might be used more maybe to build the chain, but you don't see it's not a common smart contract language. The second one is Node.js, and I think every developer should have some understanding of it because first of all, it can be used not just on the front end but also on the back end. So it's a front and back end type of language. In the blockchain world, it's mainly used for distributed apps, DApps, and for testing smart contracts. If you remember when we did that series with Solana, the test code was Node.js, and we've seen it. It's also used again to do the interface. Again, it covers the major object-oriented concepts, and the syntax is like Python, not abstract. What I mean by abstract is, uh, kind of not quite as I would say C plus plus, Rust, and are not quite as English-like. Although if you compare it to some of the other languages from years back, there isn't a huge difference like there was. I've mentioned the blockchain seems to be focused on the front end and testing. Now, if you want to write smart contracts, the two most important languages I think to learn are Solidity and Rust. Now, also, some projects have their own language, and we've seen that in the past. But Solidity is the main language of Ethereum. It's easier to learn than Rust, for sure. And Ethereum is one of the biggest chains. Rust is used quite commonly, of course. It's used in the Solana world. It's used on other chains, and but it can be more difficult to learn. Their memory model, like for example, they have this thing borrow, which I have to read up on a little bit more. But I know I've ran into stuff where you had to get things just the right size, or it wasn't going to work, and stuff like that. Um, but it's huge. You have these crates that can, or pallets rather, that can have all kinds of additional functionality. Um, and probably, I guess you can say that with the other all the languages these days, but it's not as easy to learn as Python, Node.js, or Solidity. Now, the other two important languages are Java, which is probably the one I have the most experience with, and it's used a lot for backend. It's a very common, popular language. It's used a lot for backend server type stuff. And I think it's a little easier syntactically than Rust or C or C++. And then, of course, there is C and C++. That's been around forever. Now, C Sharp is kind of well, it's C++ and C Sharp. C Sharp is kind of a more modern version. I think it's in Microsoft. I haven't done too much with it. Again, it could be a little bit more, it's not quite as easy to learn as Python and Node.js. So, what would I recommend? If you are brand new and you say, I want to learn programming, I would start with either Python or Node.js, get comfortable with them, and if you want to focus on blockchain programming, I would probably go with Node.js because it's used very commonly with the blockchain stuff. And then for a smart contract language, I'd probably learn Solidity. By the way, I have a Solidity class, kind of up and running type class on Udemy. One thing to be, it does assume basic programming. It does not go into that. So, if you have your basic programming concepts, then that class, in my class, could be appropriate. But if you're just learning and you have very little programming experience, you probably want something that's going to include all the basic concepts of programming. But and also, again, Solidity is pretty much their more specialized type of thing. So that's why I wouldn't make it your first language. I would stick with one that's used quite commonly, and that will give you, I think, a stronger footing. So hopefully this has been helpful, and I just want to get that out there because that is a question that's commonly asked. So and I would mention one other thing before I sign out about these languages. These are more traditional languages. Now, if you are into it all, game programming, I'm getting very familiar with Unreal Engine, and they do have a graphical language, so you can. And graphical languages are interesting because basically it's kind of like using libraries, right? It's because it'll tell you what inputs and outputs it has, and you kind of hook it up, which is what you do if you're using an API, really. You have an API, let's say it could be a Java class, it could be a palette in Rust, it could be a class in any of these class-based languages, and the classes will define methods, and they will say, it takes X, Y, and Z, and it returns this. And so if you see that kind of graphical type language, don't be intimidated by it. It's essentially all it is are classes, really. And in fact, in Unreal Engine, they are classes. They're C++, C Sharp classes that are compiled. In fact, when you want to build something in Unreal Engine, you do have to install, was it Microsoft? It's a free version of Microsoft. Was it their API, their IDE, their development environment? You have to have that, and all the code, the language and everything, their language, because everything is a class that is essentially built, that can be then used in the graphical language. So hopefully this has been helpful and useful, and I will speak to you next time. Take care.